All right, good morning. How is everyone doing this morning? We are live, coming at you just a little bit later today. Thanks for joining us. Today, if you've been following us all week or following me all week, we have been talking about Psalm 23:5 and how God prepares a table for us in the presence of our enemies. And as a model, we have been using this picture here, which shows a flower growing in the desert. And even though the desert is a hostile and austere environment, that flower thrives. And that's because God has set a table for it. You can see that in the drops of dew on its rose petals. And so as we continue today, yesterday I talked about the lonely, and I talked about it specifically in regards to community. Those of you who are desperate for community. Well, today I want to talk about it for those of you who are looking for love. Those of you who are looking for that significant romantic relationship, and you're afraid of, or you're struggling with the enemies that prevent you from making that happen. And I want you to know that in the presence of those enemies, that God can set a table for you there. And to do that, I wanted to show you this psalm here, because I love this psalm, and it should bring a lot of comfort to the lonely in general. You can apply this to romantic or community. And that is, where did my psalm go? It's in Psalm 68. And I may have forgot to put it on the screen, but basically it says, oh, here it is. Sorry, I mislabeled it. It says, I did mislabel it. This is Psalm 68:6. I apologize for that. And it says, God sets the lonely in families. And so you need to know that if you're lonely, God is going to set you in a family, whether that be a marriage or whether that be a community of people, whichever you tend to need at the moment. And so know that's coming. So in regards to looking for love, so to speak, and the circumstances and the challenges that you may have to finding that, I wanted to show you that God can set a table for you, even in the midst of those circumstances, with the story of Ruth. I like the story of Ruth when it comes to looking for love, because Ruth's life had complexities. And in your life, you might have complexities. All right, one of the shout outs that I made yesterday's was to the single mamas, and I also should have said to the single daddies out there, right? You have a complexity in any relationship that you come into because there's already a child or maybe children there. Same thing with individuals who have gone through a divorce and have children. There's a complexity there. In any type of divorce, typically that relationship can still follow you for years, and there's required interactions there. I knew an individual who they didn't have children, but some debt that they had collectively gotten into kept them intertwined to each other for quite a long time after they were married. And so there's complexities along with that. Medical conditions can create complexities. Financial situations can create complexities. Work situations, all these things can create challenges to you finding a significant other. And I want to tell you that most of your challenges to finding somebody significant, a spouse, don't really compares to Ruth. So let me give you a high-level story, a high-level overview of Ruth. Ruth, first of all, was a Moab woman living in Israel. And that was a challenge because the Israelites were not fond. They weren't necessarily always mean, but they were certainly not fond of foreigners. And you would have not been anybody's first pick to bring home to mom. All right. Many of you still live in cultures where mom wants you to bring home somebody of the same culture. I know that's not as popular in America, but that's still kind of there. And so but in Israel, that was certainly the case. That the person that mom wanted you to bring home was a Jewish woman, and she was Jewish in heart, but she was not Jewish in her bloodline. All right, that's not her national ethnicity, so to speak. So that was a challenge. Her other challenge, she was a widow of a man who did not give her a child, and that creates significant challenges in Israel, because Israel had a law that said that if a man died and he didn't leave a child to carry out his family lineage and to inherit his estate, that his wife should be married to his brother, so that his brother could father a child for him and pass on his inheritance to that firstborn child that would come out of that marriage. And so there were certain people that she was allowed to marry in Israel, and that is a challenge. That's a complexity. All right. In addition, Ruth was in a family where all the males had died. And so there were initially, when we first start the story of Ruth, there are 3 widows. However, one of the widows goes back home to her family, but Ruth stays with her mother-in-law. So not only does Ruth have a certain person that she could marry. Oh, and by the way, I didn't mention this, that in those marriages, I'm going to pronounce it wrong. It's called a Levirate or a Levirate marriage. And anyway, these marriages where you married the oldest brother of the family to pass on his lineage would have been the inheritance of that child would have belonged to your dead brother, and so there was a financial cost associated with these marriages as well. Just wanted to bring that up. But not only did Ruth had all these complexities, she was going to bring her former mother-in-law into the marriage. So Ruth, in our story, as I said, all the males in her family had died, and so she did not have an oldest brother to be married to. And so in her situation, that right or that requirement for someone to marry her and would have passed on to the closest relative. Well, what is the closest relative? I don't have the requirements for that, but it would have been somebody else in the family. And so these are all complexities to Ruth's life. That was certainly a challenge to her finding a spouse. And to top things off, in her culture, in her day and age, women needed a spouse in order to have a living. If you didn't have a spouse or a adult male relative, you really didn't have a means of income. And so she didn't just want a spouse for her heart. She needed a spouse to live and to provide for her mother-in-law that she was with. And so this is the situation that Ruth finds herself in. And so in the story of Ruth, and in what she was doing to provide for herself and for her mother-in-law in this time, was she would go into the fields, the barley fields, after men had harvested there, and they would leave. They would drop bits of grain, and she would go and collect the grain so that they would have something to eat. That was the only thing she could do. Consider it like probably one of the worst jobs in the world. And so she's essentially, it's kind of a combination between, like, not really a combination, but I would compare in our world to either being like a dishwasher at McDonald's, like it didn't pay a lot, or it's like almost like foraging through things that people have left on the curb to throw away that you could go sell and make money with to provide for yourself that way. Like it was not a great means of providing yourself with sustenance. And anyway, this is the situation that Ruth finds herself in, and but it is also the situation in which in which God provides or places a table, prepares a table for her in. Because on her first day of this terrible job. She happens to go into the field of Boaz. And going into the field of Boaz is a significant thing because Boaz was a close relative. So Boaz was eligible to marry her. So we got over the first legal hurdle. Boaz also, just happened to have enough money to be able to bear the financial cost of marrying her and to deal with the financial expenses that would be able that would come along with her. He also had the financial means to provide for her mother-in-law that would come with her. Right, so we've got the first two kind of physical requirements down for a spouse for Ruth. Right away, first day one of her terrible job. All of the male relatives have died. Her and her mom are in this, or mother-in-law are in this terrible situation. They don't know what they're going to do. They're desperate. They go to start foraging other people's fields for bits of grain to live off of. And what does God do? He provides a table for them right there. Meets Boaz, who not only is wealthy enough to be able to sustain her, as has the legal ability to marry her, but he has a heart of gold. He's a kind, loving, and generous man. He immediately assigns her protection and tells her men not to bother her, or tells his men not to bother her when she's harvesting the grain, just to let her alone. He actually tells his men to drop extra bits of grain on the ground for her so that she has more than enough to eat. He instructs her, he tells her to make sure that she can come rest in the shelters that he's built from the sun and drink from the water from the jars that he's filled up for his workers. So he's a very, very, very kind and generous man. But it gets better. It gets better. Because I want to show you guys this. I have sorry, wrong one. This is the right one. So clearly Boaz has a heart for Ruth. And when Ruth asks him, why do you like me? Why have you found favor? Why have I found favor in your eyes? This is what he tells her. Check this out. Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law, as she stuck with her, since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land to come to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you, the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have now take refuge. I want to just re-emphasize this part right here. Because of all that you have done for your mother-in-law. And he describes that below. Listen, what he's describing is not her beauty. He's describing her heart. There is a rich guy out there who loves Ruth, not for what she looks like or what he can bring her, but for who she is. Come on, ladies. That's where you guys all say, "Aww." All right? And so, just know that this is kind of an ideal situation for Ruth. Also, for Ruth, you should know that Jewish tradition holds that Boaz, he would have been older than Ruth, probably by several years, a number of decades actually, but so that may not have been the greatest, but he was also a widower, is what the tradition holds. It doesn't say that in the Bible. We don't know that for a fact, but Jewish tradition does hold that he was a widower for the most part. That's the consensus there. So he was single, and that's important, okay? Because a lot of times these marriages where you have to marry your older brother, she could have become a second wife, but she wasn't. Let me tell you something. That's God preparing a table for her in the presence of her enemies. Okay? Despite the challenges that Ruth had in her life to finding a significant other, God overcame them, and not just a little bit. This was not a terrible marriage. This was the perfect marriage. He's preparing a table for her in the presence of his enemies. Now, I also want to address the guys because they might feel a little bit left out in this story because they're not a girl. Boaz did have money. He did have a means to provide. But I also want you to know that he didn't do anything other than be himself to Ruth. And that's what got Ruth's attention. Okay? And I want you to know that other than just be himself, which was kind and generous, Boaz really didn't have to do much else, right? And I think this part of the story that I'm going to read to you right here, this is when Ruth proposes to Boaz for the most part, and she asks him to marry her. But what's cool about this story for guys that I think is important is that in this story, I just feel like this is going to encourage maybe one person out there. I may have, oops, this is not the right one. Sorry. Stick with me. Here we go. My bad, right here. So Ruth proposes for him on the threshing floor. We don't have time to go out. It was at night. And so she did it in secret. She goes down to him where he's sleeping at night, and he uncovers his feet, and just kind of sleeps at his feet. He sleeps at his feet, waiting for him to wake up as the cold air hits his feet. So Boaz wakes up, and at midnight the man was startled, and he turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. In Boaz's story, because if he was a widower, I'm sure he would have been lonely as well. And Ruth, who Jewish tradition does hold, was fairly beautiful, actually. He finds her at his feet, asking to marry him because he was a nice guy. Nice guys don't necessarily finish last. Okay? You don't have to necessarily be a Rico Suave or some kind of stud to find a gal out there for all you guys. You just have to be godly. You just have to pursue and be the man of God that he wants you to be in your heart. And these types of things will happen to you. Okay? So that's the story of romance, and that's how you can find love, and that's how God prepares a table for you in the presence of your enemies when you're looking for romance. Again, guys, we love all of you out there. I hope this encourages you. You can get a free copy of this picture if you want in the links above on Facebook. If you're watching on YouTube, it'll be below. And come back. We should be here tomorrow. I look forward to doing one more of these for you guys. And we'll see you then. Have a good one.